Hello and welcome to Staff Picks, the podcast for movie nerds by movie nerds. As always, I'm Mario Lanza and I am your host on our journey through the movies out there that just need a little more love. And our movie today is once again part of Horror Month this year as we go through, and I try to release 8 horror movies in October. And our movie today is a fun one. This is an old horror movie that I have loved for a long time. It's considered a cult classic by some. It's considered kind of obscure by some. And it's one I've always wanted to feature. It's called Carnival of Souls, and it's from 1962, which immediately makes it the oldest movie I have ever done on Staff Picks. So welcome back to the black and white era, my friends. And my guest for this one is we're doing something a little different here. And you may recall I did this recently about a month ago on my Citizen Ruth podcast, where I had someone, it was kind of an obscure movie, and I could not find somebody who knew it and loved it as much as I did. And so I thought, you know what would be fun is take someone who maybe is unfamiliar with this movie but is just good on podcasts and ask them to watch it and get their thoughts. And I thought that turned into a really fun episode, so I thought I'd do it again with this one. I just take a repeat host, someone who came on a while ago, and I really enjoyed their episode. And I'm like, I want to put you on another podcast, and I want your thoughts on this classic horror movie from 1962. So you may remember him from one of my most memorable episodes I've ever done, the Friday the 13th Part 6 episode. His name is Brian Farrell. He is a recent college graduate, a horror movie fan. We had a really good discussion last time, including, I think, at least 10 minutes where we were arguing. So it was fun. I always like when people get on and challenge my thoughts and argue with me on the episodes because I think it's fun to listen to. So I had him watch Carnival of Souls for the first time. Again, this is way older than he is. And I'm very excited to find out what his thoughts are. So welcome to the show, Brian Farrell.
Thank you, Mario. I know that this movie is one of your favorites. And like you said earlier, it's the oldest movie that you've ever featured on Staff Picks. And so I'm just so honored that you decided that the optimal person to talk about this movie with is a 22-year-old punk. So I'm so happy to be here today.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to point out right off the bat, because I know you feel like you're a little out of your league here talking about a movie that's this old, that's like way before you were born. This movie's so old, it was before I was born. This is 12 years before my time even. So we're on totally even playing ground. This is not of either of our times.
No, that's fair. I'm sure that there's, some cultural aspects of this movie that you would be able to relate to a lot more than I would. I think one of the things that I definitely noticed was the size of the steering wheels of the car in this movie. And I would imagine you would probably have a lot more experience with that than I would. So I'm hoping that even though this is before both of our times, we're able to use our combined wisdom of different generations to come to a good conclusion about this movie.
So why don't you tell people a little about yourself? I just kind of gave them the short version, but kind of how has your life changed since the world of Staff Picks thrust you into the spotlight a year and a half ago?
Sure, yeah. So first time I was on Staff Picks, I was a college student. I went to school for television and radio. Actually, when we recorded our first podcast, I was home from a semester in Los Angeles. So I came home for a week, watched all the Friday the 13th movies, did the podcast, and then went back to LA. And then since then, I've graduated. I now work a full-time job. I just love watching Carnival of Souls on repeat. It's one of those things where it's become a real pastime of mine, and I'm so glad that I think it's been around a year and a half since we last had our first talk. And my mother always said to me as a little kid that her dream for me would be that I would be able to do 2 Staff Picks podcasts. But what she said to me was that one of them has to be the man with 2 brains. So I really failed on that front, but I'm happy to be here regardless.
Wow. Thank God your mom didn't wish for you to be on 3 episodes, because I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, well, stranger things have happened, and stranger things have definitely happened in Carnival of Souls. So.
Okay, thank you for steering us back onto topic here. So, once again, I asked Brian to sit down and watch this movie, and I was kind of interested because it's a very much a movie of its time. This is nothing like any other movie I've covered on Staff Picks, and I was pleased without going too far into it. You said you liked it right off the bat, right?
I did like this movie. I think for me, this movie falls into the very particular category of I simultaneously like this movie. I'm glad that I watched it, but at the same time, I really don't want to watch it again. Um, I had to. I watched it twice over the course of the last few days. One time just to watch, the other time just to take notes. And watching it so close together, it just it really messes with you. It's not a pleasant movie by any account. Um, so I would say that this is a movie that I definitely enjoy. I'm glad that it's something that I can talk about, and I'm glad that I'm now a part of the Carnival of Souls fandom, as you would call it. But at the same time, not anytime soon do I plan on watching this movie again.
Well, that's interesting because now if it's a comedy and you say I don't want to watch this again, that's an interest that that's not a recommendation. For a horror movie, that might actually be as high praise because it's like, oh, this movie's unpleasant to sit through and it bothers me and it's disturbing. That's why I don't want to see it again. Is that indeed what you're saying?
Oh yeah, that's definitely what I'm saying. There are a couple times when I was watching this movie the first time where I'm like, "Ooh, I really just want to look away from the screen because I don't like what I'm seeing right now." Not unlike when I would watch the original Friday the 13th movies, and whenever I would see boobs, I would, cover my eyes and try to look away. Fortunately for this movie, there's not a nipple in sight, but there's a lot of very disturbing images that are just like, "Oh, I just don't like looking at this."
Well, okay, that's really interesting. Let's delve into that for a second because you're tying into one of the things that I love the most about this movie. There is not a drop of blood in this movie. There's no gore. There's no jump scares, no boobs. Like this is basically a Twilight Zone episode that you could put on TV. So it's very tame in that sense. In fact, I almost hesitate to call it a horror movie. Would you agree with that?
I would semi agree with that. I guess, your whole definition of horror movie depends on the individual, but this is a psychological thriller, I guess you could definitely say.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it definitely plays with your mind and it plays with the mind of the main character in the movie. Correct me if I'm wrong. This movie was rated PG, right?
I believe so. I see no reason this would be rated R.
Right. Yeah. So, like you said, there's no blood. There's very little things that could scare you just beyond one particular thing that keeps happening. And then the climax of this movie and really the last 20 minutes or so is when it really kind of kicks into gear and you're just thrust, in your face with all these different disturbing things that'll really, really mess with you.
Yeah, the way I've always described Carnival of Souls is that it's creepy more than scary. Like, it's certainly not a modern horror movie. In fact, I introduced my daughter to it a while back. She's 21, 20. She's 20. I should know that. She's 20, and she loves modern horror movies. And I showed her this, and I was kind of on pins and needles, wondering if she was going to like it. But she told me afterwards, she's like, I really like that. So I thought, oh, full steam ahead. If my daughter likes this one, I'm going to go ahead with it. But it's nothing like what people would expect from a modern horror movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like you said, definitely not a lot of jump scares. I can't think of one off the top of my head. No blood. There's not really any type of killing in it, or really things that would make the average person scared, other than just these external fantastical elements that are at play in that. And I guess one good thing that this movie really does is it puts you in the perspective of the main character, which is, like, no kidding, but in the sense of just as she's experiencing all these types of horrible things in her head and has all these questions and she's confused, we're right there with her because we don't have any more answers than she does. So we are just as confused. We're just as scared, if you want to call it that. We're just as terrified as she is. And, I think overall, the one thing that I would say really creeps me out about this movie, above anything else, is organ music.
Good.
I coming into this movie, I didn't have much of an opinion on organs, but I think it's safe to say after watching this movie a couple different times that I'm definitely of the opinion that organs are not a good thing. They the contribution that they have to this movie and what they do to really help create the mood and help make the movie feel as creepy as it is just as important as anything else you're actually seeing on screen. I think if you take the music out of it, the product that you have is vastly different and definitely not as creepy.
Oh yeah, but you could say the same thing about Halloween. Like I think that's how I described Halloween on my Staff Picks episode. It's just people walking around Pasadena. And then you put the music in there and it's a whole different experience. And that's this movie too. It's just a woman walking around Salt Lake City, but there's creepy carnival or church organ music.
Yeah, no, and I think to go along with that, and I don't know if you want to tie this into the actual discussion of, the events of the movie, but as far as I'm aware, basically all the music in this movie is organ music. The only time you're hearing music that isn't organ music is in two very short snippets near the beginning of the movie and near the end of the movie. Every other time you hear music, it's organ music. So they really want to drill the organ thing into your head, and it definitely sticks with you, and it really it takes this movie to a whole nother level.
I'm so happy you said that, because that's what I think of when I think Carnival of Souls, is that organ music. It's so distinct, and I cannot think of any other movie in my lifetime that features music like to that extent where it becomes the movie.
Yeah, no, I think it's also interesting how the organ music itself is important to the movie, but it's also a part of the plot. So it's the main character plays the organ for a church. And so there is a reason why we have organ music and why we have it frequently and why it plays a role in her, I guess, psyche, just because it's something that she's exposed to all the time. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that it's just a constant presence in this movie, I guess if there was just organ music in the scenes where she's playing the organ, that's one thing. But the fact that they take that and then just really just hammer it in with organ music every few minutes, and it's long stretches of organ music, like that's going to be the only thing that you're hearing for a large portion of the movie.
Yeah, the movie's almost silent at times. It's just music, and that's it.
Yeah, I think this movie does a great job with incorporating music, incorporating silence, and then also incorporating very selective sounds. Like there's portions of this movie where the only thing you're hearing is the footsteps of the main character. Or and I think that's also included as part of the plot too. And again, this is something that we can get into a little bit later once we go through the movie. But sounds and how sounds can help you interact with the world around you is a really important part of this movie too. And I think it helps to create that horror when you hear certain things or you don't hear anything at all. So I think just as this movie has some really creepy visuals in it, it definitely has a very creepy sound design too that really, really, really helps to make this a unique movie.
I'm really glad I picked you. And I hope my listeners, listening to the stuff that he points out, like the sounds, selective sounds and stuff, I could tell in a second that you studied TV and editing and stuff, because those are great observations. I'm glad you're really talking about this already.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's because, I start off with the really strong stuff, and then eventually it's going to get downhill to when I'm nitpicking individual stuff and poking fun at the movie, which I do with love, mind you. Every nitpick that I have is just to, poke fun at the movie, but I'm doing it with full appreciation. I'm not trying to trash anybody's favorite movie or anything. Oh,
yeah. Well, I should point out they covered this movie on Riff Tracks. You know what Riff Tracks is, right?
I know Riff Raff from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Riff Tracks is the modern version of Mystery Science Theater, where they took old movies and watched them. And they covered this on Riff Tracks, and they just riffed on it and made fun of it. So I was a little hurt by that, because I don't think this movie really deserves it. But at the same time, there are things you can nitpick, and it's so easy to mock because it's silent, because there's so little dialogue. But I have seen it mocked out of love before. And the creators of Riff Tracks have even said they love this movie. So it was out of love then as well.
Sure, yeah, and I think we wouldn't be having this discussion if we didn't enjoy this movie and we didn't have a certain appreciation for this movie. We're doing this this is an underrated movie podcast. This is not a let's dog on everyone's cult classic movies podcast. So we're everything we're doing is very genuine and from the heart.
Okay, and now comes the fun part of the podcast. My friend Brian here specifically did no research on the history of this movie. You know nothing about how this movie came about or how it's been received over time, correct?
I know nothing. I went into this like it was a presentation for one of my college classes. I went completely blind and I'm winging it.
Okay, good. So I will drop some info on you. So this movie was made in 1962, very early in the modern horror boom, 2 years after Psycho. So we're very early in the Twilight Zone era, Alfred Hitchcock era. And this movie made no impact whatsoever. It was a financial flop. It had no legacy whatsoever. In fact, not only that, they forgot to put a copyright on the print, so it immediately went into public domain the day it was released.
Great.
Yeah, so just for people who are listening, you can watch this on YouTube for free. Carnival of Souls is everywhere. It's free. No one ever made a cent off it.
Yeah, the first time I ever watched this movie, I watched it on YouTube. It's also on HBO Max, if that's something that you're so inclined to watch.
Okay, yeah, so this movie made no impact, but along the way, a lot of filmmakers, future filmmakers like George Romero, David Lynch, saw this movie and it kind of stuck in their heads. And they all said this was a big influence on Night of the Living Dead, Eraserhead, these art movies later. There's just something about this movie that's eerie and evil, and you remember it. It's so different, and it later developed a renaissance where it developed a word of mouth. So even though it was virtually unknown from 1962 through about 1985, in the late 80s, it kind of was rediscovered, and they gave it a big release, a re-release in the theaters, and it kind of became this modern cult classic, even though for 27 years nobody cared about it, and then all of a sudden it was one of the most beloved horror classics of all time. And again, it's a very influential movie, despite the fact that nobody ever made a cent off of it.
Yeah, no, I definitely believe everything you just said. Before you introduced me to this movie, I had never even heard of it. I consider myself to be a decent enough horror fan. But that being said, I've never heard of this whatsoever. But with those particular movies that you had mentioned, in regards to it having an influence on those movies, I definitely understand that. The fact that this was so early on in, the history of movies, we're post the old monster movie era, we're in the heat of all these great Hitchcock films, and we're before all of the craziness and campiness of the 70s and 80s. So I think we're in a nice sweet spot in the history of horror, enough for this to make a definite impact moving forward.
And one could also call this the very first zombie movie. Now, Night of the Living Dead usually gets credit for this, but this technically, if you look at some of the imagery, those are probably zombies, Walking Dead. I guess I should really explain to people what this movie's about. It's about a woman who gets in a car crash, and she kind of straddles the line between still being alive or being dead, and she's kind of caught between the two worlds. Is she alive or is she dead? And it's all about souls and hell and death coming for her not ready to go, not being really realizing what's going on. But there are some scenes with people that I believe would be considered Walking Dead zombies. So I think this would be the first zombie movie, perhaps.
Sure, yeah. I think in particular, just the last few minutes of this movie, there's a chase scene that if you had told people it was from Night of the Living Dead or any of these other major zombie films, they would definitely believe it.
Yep. Okay. And let's see here. Oh, I got to give you the filmmaker trivia. Would you believe, Brian, this is the only movie the director ever directed? I
would believe that.
Yeah. It's very amateurish, but it kind of works in a way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, as a very general note, I find a lot of charm in mistakes, and there are definitely a lot of mistakes just in terms of production-wise, some mistakes in this, and that makes a movie a lot more endearing to me. And I did see, and I don't count this as doing research because I saw it underneath, but the cast for this movie, the director also is like the main villain character of this movie, correct? He plays him?
Yeah, he's the main guy, the corpse guy.
Sure. Do we know why he chose to do that?
I will tell you. Okay, I'll drop some more trivia. So, this movie was directed, directed and produced by a man named Herc Harvey, who created industrial films in Kansas. That's all he did. He created these educational films. And one day when he was driving from Kansas to the West Coast, he drove through Salt Lake City. And he saw this abandoned amusement park sitting out there on the Great Salt Lake. It was called the Salt Air Resort. And anybody who's seen this movie knows what the Salt Air Resort is, because this entire movie revolves around it, this abandoned amusement park. And the guy was driving by it. He's like, I'd like to make a movie about that place. That looks creepy. So he raised money, got investors, threw it all together, had a friend write a script for him, and he basically threw together the cheapest movie possible where he couldn't afford to hire actors. That's why he is also the star as the bad guy.
And I guess when he saw this abandoned amusement park, he said to himself, it would be a really great idea for me to say that this is the entrance to hell.
Yes. I personally, abandoned amusement parks are one of the creepiest things to me. Like when I see websites, there's websites out there dedicated to amusement parks and malls that have been abandoned over the years and are like overgrown. And those are like crack to me because I think those are the greatest settings for horror movies. And that's why I was always attracted to this one. Like, my God, this Salt Air place is so cool. I wish I could have gone there when it was standing.
Now, what makes you so interested in them? Like, is it the fact that there's, I don't know, like some weird imagery in some of these parks? Like, you can see like a fun house or something like that, and even though, when people are in it, it's not exactly creepy, but then all of a sudden, when it's quiet, it's super creepy and all that stuff. What is it about abandoned amusement parks that really interests you?
I'm not entirely sure. And it's, a lot of people think clowns are creepy. And like, if you go on the merry-go-round with the carnival music and you like grab the rings and throw them in the ring toss, I always thought those were so creepy with that organ music. Just the whole idea of a carnival is always borderline cool/creepy. And when you find an abandoned one where there's just the stuff is left, but there's no people, I think it's so haunting to look at. I don't really know how to describe it any better than that.
Sure. Yeah, I know that you're definitely not the only person that has that obsession, because I think on YouTube there's a pretty decently sized, fan base for abandoned amusement parks, because you see, I get in my recommended, I never watched them. Maybe I should after watching this movie, but I see a lot of these stories of real life abandoned amusement parks, and they have all these views, and people will write these horror stories about it's Disney after dark, and then all these crazy things are happening. So there's definitely an audience for this type of thing, and I never really understood it myself, but after watching this movie, I am starting to understand it.
Yeah, because that's the real star of this movie, the Salt Air Pavilion in Salt Lake City, which again was a real place. I did the research here. It was a huge resort back in the 1890s up through World War II, and then after World War II, the popularity of this place just went down. Like, if people have been to like Coney Island, Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, depending on which coast you're on, it was like one of those places on the Great Salt Lake, and then it was abandoned, and it sat abandoned from like 1950-something to the 70s for like 20 years. And that's when they filmed this movie in the middle, when it was just sitting there. Anybody could drive by and take pictures of this. And I'm just so fascinated that this guy wrote a movie just based around the fact that he saw this resort and he's like, I want to set a movie there. And he did. It was a real place.
So the carnival that's in this movie is that resort?
Yes, that is the Salt Air Resort in Salt Lake City, which has been rebuilt. They rebuilt it in the 80s, and I believe it still exists today. It's like a country music venue where they have concerts and stuff, but it looks much different. It's the same location. They just rebuilt it, because the one you see in this movie burned down, I think, in the late 60s or 60s or 70s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, well, one thing that I was, was initially struggling to come to terms with when watching this movie is that, this movie was made or it was at least released in 1962. And for them in the 60s, an old abandoned place is a lot different from us living in whatever current year it is, thinking about an old abandoned place. Because an old abandoned place for them is, like you said, something from the late 1800s through World War II. Whereas for us, we could have an abandoned place from 1980 and it could be creepy.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about, for them, what they view as something that's all this old creepy thing is different from the way that we would view it. We would view something from the 1960s that hasn't been touched as the same way that they would view something from 1900 as being creepy.
Yeah, and that's why I think really works in this movie's favor, because it's old to begin with. So it's dated and kind of weird. It's not the world that we're used to if you watch it now. And it involves a place that was old even to them in the 60s. So it's like doubly old. Like I just love the age in this, whether the age works for the telling of the story. It was a real place. I've driven by there in Salt Lake City. I'd seen it before, and every time, if I'm ever in the area, I want to go take my daughter to it because I want to show her the Saltaire Resort. That was where they filmed Carnival of Souls. So it's like, I think this is the only major movie they ever filmed there. So it's like a little time capsule.
Yeah, and I think just hopping onto the whole thing about the location, one thing that I find particularly interesting about this is that I think in many horror movies, when that's centered around a location, there's a tendency to try to give it a specific backstory, like, there was this big fire and all these people died, or there was a serial killer there, and there's all these ghosts and stuff like that. For this movie, they really don't have that. It's just that we get the story of it used to be a bathhouse, then it was a dance hall, then it was a carnival, now it's abandoned. There's no real story behind it that would make it be any creepier than any other location. So I think that's one thing that's interesting, is that for the people that are in the world of this movie, this is just an abandoned location. It's not like it's somewhere where it's like, oh, you got to keep out from there. There's all these stories of things that happen in there. And so I think that was an interesting choice by the filmmakers.
Well, it was functional too. I was just reading this on the trivia today that the Saltaire was a condemned old resort, and the director said, "Hey, can we film there?" And the city of Salt Lake City said, "Sure, give us $50." And so for $50, he got it for 3 days. So it's just functional. He had a very limited budget. He's like, well, all we can do is give it 3 days. We can't really gussy it up or decorate it. We'll just set part of our movie here. So again, a lot of the stuff that happens in this movie was kind of accidental because the director was cheap and had no budget.
Well, they paid $50 and got a few days for filming at the movie. Nowadays, you could pay $50 and get a couple hours at an amusement park. So
that's true. Minus the giant steering wheel, though. That was the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's walk through Carnival of Souls here, which again is a very short movie. I think the version that I saw was only 77 minutes. It's a very short movie.
Yeah, same thing that I saw. It was like hour 18, whatever that is. 78 minutes, 77.
Yeah, but again, if you've never seen it, it's a fun little nightmare of a movie. Don't go into it expecting a modern horror movie. It's just like it's like watching a bad dream where everything's just off a little bit. It's a weird movie, but it somehow will stick in your head. As Brian said, he doesn't want to watch it anymore, which, as horror movies go, once again, that's high praise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also important for us to note in regards to the length is just how little plot there is to this. Like, there's maybe like 4 or 5 actual story beats to this movie. If you tried to explain the plot to someone, you could probably finish it in like 15 seconds. So there's not a lot that really happens. It's just kind of all these things happening around the plot that are the most interesting about this movie. So I'm looking forward to going into that.
Okay, and again, there's a lot of interpretation to come out of this movie. It's not cut and dry what happened. So I'm excited at the end. We're going to try to talk about what we think happened in this movie.
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right. I'm glad that this has far more room for interpretation as compared to Friday the 13th Part 6.
Well, with that, after I listened to the director's commentary to it, along with the editor of the movie and the actor who played Deputy Rick, there was no secrets there. I got everything I needed to know. Everything was, very clearly laid out.
So did I miss something in Jason Lives? It was like a Christ metaphor, the whole story. Did I miss it somehow?
I think actually in the deleted scenes for it, there was one part where one of the little girls at the camp looked up at the sky and whispered "thank you," and that didn't make it into the final cut of the movie. So there was some religious stuff that didn't make it. But I guess that they would save that for part 9 when Jason goes to hell. Actually, Jason goes to hell opens with him going to the Carnival of Souls.
Oh, wow. So it all comes full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so here we go. We'll walk through this nightmare of a movie. Again, I could not recommend this more. I used to have a website, a list on Facebook called 10 Great Horror Movies Most People Have Never Seen. This was always number 1, the first one I mentioned because it was so old. But we will walk through it here. So how does this movie start? It starts with a drag race, correct?
Yeah, this doesn't waste any time. It jumps right into it with a drag race. We got a car full of guys. We got a car full of girls. And they're at it, drag racing all through the streets of wherever. I don't know if the beginning location of this movie is ever stated.
It's Kansas. Kansas is where it's filmed.
Kansas. Okay, great. So I will say that another thing that I learned from this movie is that drag racing looks absolutely miserable.
Now, why do you say that?
Well, I mean, we have our main character. Her name is Mary. And throughout the entirety of this drag racing sequence, every time it cuts to her, she has this like horrified look on her face. Like, I thought drag racing was supposed to be fun. She's not, this isn't selling me on drag racing at all.
You know, Brian, if you're expecting Mary to smile in this movie, you're going to be very disappointed.
Well, just wait until she meets Mr. Linden.
Yes. Our main character, if you've never seen this, has an enormous stick up her butt the whole movie. She never enjoys anything.
And I understand it. With drag racing and demons and organ music, there's not much to enjoy here.
But it's Kansas. Kansas in the 40s, or where are we, 60s. What could be more fun than Kansas in the 60s?
Well, there's no place like home.
Well done. Nice. Okay, yeah, so we start with a drag race. It's 2 guys against 3 girls, which I don't remember another movie where girls drag race against guys. It's usually guys. But for purposes of this movie, it's a car full of 3 girls, the unsmiling Mary and her 2 friends, and they're drag racing across a bridge, which is a real bridge in Kansas they had to rent for the movie. And the car with the 3 girls hits a loose board, goes spinning off into the water, and basically we're to assume that all 3 of the girls drowned. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, and I think actually another fun fact about this movie, and I know I said I didn't do any research, but there was this inescapable thing that I had to mention, is that in a deleted scene from Back to the Future Part 3, Marty McFly went back in time and watched Carnival of Souls, and that's what convinced him to not drag race needles at the end of the movie.
I thought it was the chicken subplot that did it.
Well, I think later in the movie, Mr. Linden does refer to one of his buddies as Chicken, so that might be a McFly descendant or ancestor, I guess.
Okay, here's some fun fact about this movie. This sequence at the start where a car crashes through this wooden bridge and goes into a lake, or a river, I guess. They really filmed that, and it was one of the big stunts in the movie, that the director basically went to this little town in Kansas and said, "Can I break your side rail for a movie?" And they said, "Yes, but you have to fix it afterwards." So he drove a car through the wooden bridge, he dumped it into the river, and then he had to rebuild the side of the bridge that broke, and it cost $19, which in a $30,000 movie, that was a sizable expense.
Now, was the other $29,000 just the fact that he dumped a car in the water and he had to deal something with that?
Yeah, they didn't mention that in the trivia, so I'm not sure how much the ruining of the car was in their budget. But they do really throw a car upside down into a river, which is impressive for this little movie.
Yeah, definitely, and it sinks fast.
Yeah, well, gravity was much stronger back then, back in the 60s.
Well, what with the ozone layer and all that stuff.
Yes. So Mary and her 2 friends, who she apparently doesn't appear to enjoy, all go into the water, and they're presumed drowned. And like I said, this movie is kind of a person caught between the world of the living and the dead, where the two friends, they can't find, they can't find the car. That's what I remember. They bring out searchers, they can't find it. And all of a sudden, after hours of searching, Mary kind of wanders out of the river and she's barefoot and walking through the mud. They're like, how the hell did that girl survive? But somehow she did.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that their idea of searching is kind of just taking a really small grappling hook and throwing it into the water a bunch of times in the hopes that they'll pick up the car, I guess.
These were simple times, Brian. Simple country folk.
I think I also noticed at one point we have all these extras looking for them, and I think I might have seen at the time current Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson with the clipboard during the search party.
Wow, he was a good get for a movie this size.
Well, that's where the rest of the budget went towards.
They couldn't get Nixon.
Well, they had to get LBJ off the toilet to come and do this movie.
So, yes, President Lyndon Johnson and his searching pals cannot find the car. Somehow Mary survives, and she's like the only survivor of this horrible accident in the town. And I think from there, we just cut to her the next day playing the pipe organ. This is where we're going to learn we're not going to learn much about this character other than she's a cold fish. She's not especially fun to hang around, but she plays a mean organ.
She plays a mean organ, and she's all business.
She is. She went to college. She studied pipe organ, I think they say.
She was at the top of her class because she was the only one in the class.
Yes. But yeah, so, okay, I guess we should talk about the actress. The actress in this movie, her name is Candice Hilligoss, and she really didn't do many other movies. This is like her only big one known on her resume. And again, this movie was a flop. And I remember reading somewhere her agent hated this movie so much that the minute he saw it, he refused to represent her anymore. So this is her one claim to fame. But she's in this movie a lot, and she's surprisingly really good for such an amateur movie. She does kind of carry it and sell it.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we see this movie through her eyes. We're experiencing things just as she's experiencing things. And so when she's terrified, we feel that too. So I think, she definitely gave a very good performance. Not just her. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did anybody in this movie go on to do anything else? Because I didn't recognize a single person in this movie.
No, the guy, Mr. Linden, the other boarding house guy, the creepy guy, he later became the drama teacher at the University of Oklahoma, but he never starred in anything else.
Okay. Well, I think it also says something about Mr. Linden's character when there is quite literally a demon character in this movie, and yet you refer to him as the creepy guy.
Yes. Yeah, there's only, I think there was 5 people in the crew for this movie. There's like 6 actors total. It's so bare bones and low budget, and it's amazing that it actually works. That's the crazy thing. And as we go along, I'll point out some other examples of how cheap it is.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out to all the extras in this movie, because I think, a lot of the times extras like to phone it in, but everyone in this movie, all the extras, they're doing their best. They're really trying hard. Whether they're dancing around in the bar, or you get the one guy who I made a note about at the search party, who looks at the water for a second, shrugs his shoulders, and then walks away. There's a lot of people really trying their best in this movie.
And that was the 10th take. It took them a while to get that shrug right.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, our main character name is Mary Henry, and she has survived this horrible accident, and she is getting ready to leave for a job. Again, we're starting in Kansas. She has a job in Utah, which I guess would be an upgrade from Kansas. I'm not sure how that works on the scale, but there's a church out in Salt Lake City that has hired her to play the pipe organ, and she's packing up and getting ready to go. And I think we see her with her mentor here, or her last employer, and he's like, that's a good job, but you'll be in a church now. You should put a little soul into your music in church. And she's like, I don't believe in God. It's just a business to me. I have no interest in the church whatsoever. And that will be a minor subplot through this movie. She doesn't believe in religion.
Yeah, and I think this scene takes place in an organ factory, I believe, because there's a lot of shots of workers doing all of this work, and there's a bunch of organs all over the place. I also wanted to point out that in the background of one of these shots, there's like a sexy calendar. We're in the workshop, and we see these guys hard at work. And if you look closely, you can see the sexy calendar in the background. So giving this movie a little personality.
So it's a auto garage / pipe organ factory.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had to cut costs somehow, so they decided to just, shoot one location as two different places.
I never thought about where she was, but that it does look like a pipe organ factory, or like, yeah, it's the the organ store. Apparently, they're selling a lot of pipe organs around there.
Yeah, well, this was a place for all the organ donors where they wanted to go. They would just go and leave their organs there.
That was terrible, but I'll accept that. That's good. All right. All right. So Mary packs up, and again, she's just a single gal in the '60s. Doesn't have a boyfriend. Doesn't want a boyfriend. Kind of a liberated woman for her time, and we get a big long montage of her driving from Kansas to Utah, and I love this scene. This is creepier than it has any right to be because it's all shadows and organ music on her creepy drive into Utah.
Yeah, well, I think the scene starts off with one of the few instances that I mentioned earlier where there's actual music playing, but then it very quickly transitions into that organ music. And then I do like how once the organ music starts, we see Mary frantically trying to adjust the radio. So it's kind of like giving us the implication that she's hearing organ music too, even though that's probably not the case. But yeah, I agree. This is definitely a very creepy scene. I did want to point out though the sign for Utah that said "Welcome to Utah. Please drive carefully."
Hmm.
So that just gives me it implies that inside of Utah they're very big on their traffic laws, but outside of Utah it's just total lawlessness. You don't want to drive carefully in Kansas. They don't care. In Utah though, that's where you got to watch out.
Wyoming is just a hellscape.
Yeah, well, when you get all these crazy drag races happening all over the place, I guess Utah felt the need to just put that disclaimer in there.
Do I need to point out that the drag race at the start of the movie is that they drive at very sensible speeds of about 25 miles an hour?
Yeah, well, and I didn't want to, point this out too, but I didn't. You said that they drove off the bridge because they hit a loose board. I did not get that indication from watching it. It kind of just looked like they just fell. Like she very quickly, they all started screaming, and then next thing you know, they were in the water. Like they didn't show the other car bumping them off or anything, but I'll allow it.
Brian, women drivers. Am I right?
Oh, this is getting cut, isn't it?
No, but I think they meant to have a stunt there where the car hits something, but they didn't have the budget to film it. So the car just suddenly veers off the bridge. But something happened. Take our word for it.
Well, they only had so much wood to replace the destruction they did on the bridge, so they didn't want to, have to shell out another $20 or whatever it was.
Okay, so yeah, this is a really long, eerie scene of Mary just driving along. And again, they didn't have the budget to film like normal movies do, where you have a backdrop behind the car. So it's really cheaply done, but it's a neat little eerie effect where it's very claustrophobic. She's in her car all by herself, and we get this eerie pipe organ music. Now, Brian and I have tried to already in this podcast sell you on how creepy this music is. I don't know if we can really get it across without playing it for them. Would you say? Is there any way to describe how eerie this music is when you hear it over and over?
Oh no, it is. It is very, very creepy. So much to the point where when I was watching this movie the second time around to take notes, I had considered putting it on mute just so I wouldn't have to listen to the organ music.
Wow.
Yeah, it really got to me.
Yeah, if you guys are obviously if you're listening to this point in the podcast, the music that I started this episode with is a old Four Seasons song called "Save It For Me," and there's a really creepy synthesizer organ part in the middle of that song I've always liked, and that's if you think back to the start of the episode, it's very similar to that music you heard. It's just you get this weird, dreamlike pipe organ, carnival organ music. It's the entire soundtrack for the rest of the movie. It just tells you something's a little off here.
Yeah, well, the good thing about this movie being in the public domain is that you could rip the entirety of the organ music and play it underneath this entire podcast, and no one would be able to come after you. So if they really want to, you can include that in as a bonus feature.
Well, it's funny. I was just reading that one of the reviews of this movie, one of the contemporary reviews of Carnival of Souls said, you could take a camcorder outside with four of your friends and basically recreate this entire movie. It wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. As long as you're willing to pay the money that you need to repair any bridges or rent out any carnivals. I definitely agree with that. Like you said, this was something that was low budget. It was, not the most renowned group of people that came together to do it, but it's got a lot of heart. It's got a lot of soul, I guess you could say. Um, but it's definitely it's not the most complex movie in the world from a production standpoint.
Yeah, but I mean, all those aside, you're not wrong about any of those. But I will say it was made by someone who knows how to tell a increasingly creeping evil story. That's all I can say. I've seen modern movies with way higher budgets that don't do that as well as this movie, where it's a escalation of a story from nothing into something. It's just the momentum of this movie is very good.
Yeah, the momentum's good. The pacing is very good. I think once we hit that halfway point is when things really start to go crazy. And I noticed, and the only reason you notice that is just because the first half of this movie, it takes its time, and it'll sprinkle in these creepier moments, and it'll start making you wonder, a couple different things. But then once we hit the halfway point, and everything starts going insane, there's no turning back. It's just one bizarre thing after another.
I love that a 77-minute movie can take its time, but it does. Yeah. Somehow it does.
It really does. And I guess that could also that can happen when you have so much, silence and so many scenes that are just music. It's they can feel a lot longer than they actually are, just because there's that the way that they incorporate sound into it.
And speaking of silence and sound, here we are about to meet the star of the movie. As she is driving into Utah, we see the Saltair Resort off on the horizon. Now, how would you describe the Saltair Resort to someone who has never seen it before?
Well, from when we first see it, just from very far away, it's dark. It's got that big top type of look. Just from looking at it from far away. Once we actually get inside, there's all these really bizarre features, like you got a big slide that you might see at a usual amusement park, but then it's also got all this decor to it. Like there's a castle somewhere. We see these weird hanging drum type things. And there's all these gates and fences surrounding the place. There's a dried up lake, I think, next to it. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of very weird features to it. And no lights in sight. Most of the time when we're looking at this place, it's dark. And that's for a very good reason.
Yeah, and again, they didn't make this place up for the movie. They didn't decorate it. There's no, special effects. It's just an old abandoned building that's been there for 60 years, and the director's like, I'm going to use that in the movie. So we just get lots of shots of her driving and seeing it off in the distance, and she's somehow fixated on this place. She just knows. She's like, that's interesting. And again, it's you got to see this movie just for the Saltair Resort. It's the only living proof that this old building, ever existed, and it's featured so heavily in this movie. She goes and explores it later. But yeah, there's nothing done to it to make it look creepy for the movie. It just is. They just film it.
Yeah, and the location itself is really, it's more of a character than any of the other characters in this movie. And I say this in a good way, I guess, but Mary doesn't have too much of a personality herself, just in how rigid she is. And this makes up for that just with how out there it is, and the choices that they do make with what happens inside of it. So, it's a unique location. I don't know where in the history of the abandoned theme park genre this falls, if this was the beginning of that, if this was in the middle of it, I don't know. But for what it is, it's definitely a very creepy resort.
And I will drop a little trivia fact on my listeners. Here's a Mario favorite. If you drive from Southern California to Las Vegas, somewhere out a little past Barstow on Highway 15, there's an abandoned water slide park. I think it's called the Rockahula, or it was at some point. And it's just sitting there in the middle of the desert, and there's gates around it, and all the structures are still there, and it looks a lot like Saltaire. And every time I drive by it on the way to Vegas, I'm like, I want to get out and walk around there and take pictures, even though I know it's illegal, but I never actually have. But so there's your tip. If you were going to recreate this movie with a handheld camera and 4 friends, that's one place you can go. Although my lawyers instruct me to say I did not tell you to go there.
Yeah, well, you could just pull a Utah and have a disclaimer underneath that says, just be careful.
Please explore safely.
Yeah.
Okay, so as she's driving and all these shadows and music are appearing and she sees the Saltaire Resort, we get one of the first legitimately creepy scenes in the movie where all of a sudden in the passenger side or the window, she sees this corpse-like man. He's like an old dude in a suit, a dark suit with a white face, just kind of staring at her through the window, and she kind of shrieks. And then later she sees him in the middle of the road, right? She sees him twice.
Yep, she sees him the first time in the most reflective car windows that I've ever seen. And then the second time she sees him in the middle of the road, and that causes her to cut the steering wheel and immediately go over the road again. So not even 15 minutes into the movie, and Mary's already gone off the road twice.
Yes, Mary is a terrible driver. Well, technically she wasn't the driver the first time, so we'll give her a pass.
Sure, that's fair.
But yeah, so this is the director, Herc Harvey, dressed up as, I would just describe him as the Corpse Man. I think he's just called Man in the credits. But he is this specter of death who will be following her the rest of the movie. He's like a stalker, very reminiscent of Michael Myers following Laurie many years later in Halloween.
Yeah, and he has no dialogue. He doesn't make a single sound. There's no real explanation behind him that's ever given at any point. He's just there, and you have to accept it, and you kind of just have to figure it out on your own.
Yep. Okay. So let's jump ahead here. So she gets to Salt Lake City for her job, and she stops at a gas station. And her first question you think would be, hey, where am I staying? Or where's my lodging for the night? But no, she asked the gas station attendant, what's with that creepy old carnival outside of town, that resort? And he's like, oh, that was a big bathhouse, big place. People used to go there, big resort, but it's kind of abandoned now. No one goes there anymore. But she's just fixated on it. She just wonders what that was. And then she's like, okay, where am I staying? He's like, well, next door is the rooming house. So this is where we go next door. We meet her landlady, this old nosy lady, and her creepy roommate from across the hall, Mr. Linden.
And this the thing about this house, Mario, and I'm a little upset that you neglected to mention it, but it's very special in the sense that you can take as many baths as you want in this place, and nobody's gonna care. Multiple times does Mrs. Thomas, the landlady, mention that Mary can take as many baths as she wants, and she won't even care. So this is, high quality place.
There's no judgments at this place if you're a bath hoarder.
No, none at all.
Yes. But Mary has a nice room in this boarding house with her own bathroom and bathtub, as Brian pointed out. And across the hall is this creepy guy, Mr. Linden. He will be trying to get in her pants endlessly for the rest of the movie. It never happens. He is this creepy guy. But the first thing that happens after Mary moves into her room is she looks out the window, and again, lest you forget this is a horror movie, she sees that corpse guy from earlier standing out on her lawn looking up at her. Again, very reminiscent of, we see a scene very similar to that in Halloween that John Carpenter uses.
Yeah, and I think I also thought it was interesting that she sees him the first time, and then she goes back and looks at the window again, and this time she doesn't see him, and she just smiles. She doesn't smile a lot in this movie. So I guess for now that she's just starting to get used to seeing this guy, when she gets that little sense of security is when she's able to breathe a sigh of relief before things totally go off the rails.
That might indeed be the only smile she has in the movie. I'm glad you pointed that one out.
Yeah, the only smile until Mr. Linden shows up.
Yeah. That guy's just pure charm.
Yeah, I will say that if this movie came out nowadays, the Mr. Linden would just be raked over the coals on Twitter. He's something else, this guy.
Yeah, there's different rules in play in this movie for dating in the 60s as opposed to, I guess, dating in a movie in the 2020s, where in the 60s, Mr. Linden will just fling himself at her, break down her door, basically, come into her room, barge in, and badger her until after the 10th or 11th no, she eventually says yes just to shut him up. So he is very persistent.
Yeah, my thing with Mr. Linden is that he just reminds me of a cartoon character, kind of, just in the way that he talks, in the way that he moves, like in his facial expressions. Like he doesn't feel like a real person. He kind of seems like the type of guy that would say "ya bang" if he had the opportunity.
Hopefully, okay. Thank you for the wonderful Friday the 13th Part 6 reference. You've slipped into a Carnival of Souls discussion.
Well, if you got nothing else, you just play the hits.
I know. I didn't want to explain that joke, but I was worried no one would get it. Yeah, that was a Friday the 13th Part 6 reference. Okay, so Mary has moved in, and now we see their first day at her new job. She works in a church in Salt Lake City, which we're going to assume is probably Mormon. Just seems like a solid guess, a Mormon temple. I'm not sure, but do they have, you're not LDS, are you? You wouldn't know this. Do they have those pipe organs in Mormon temples too?
My only experience is that I've seen Book of Mormon on Broadway, so I can't speak one way or the other to the accuracy.
I don't know, maybe it's Catholic, but she's playing this organ, and then the priest comes around, so it must be Catholic. So it's the only Catholic church in Salt Lake City apparently, and he's listening to her play. She's practicing this giant ornate pipe organ in a church, and he's like, "Oh, that's very beautiful," but he's like, "We should have a reception tonight to introduce you to the town." And Mary, who is an enormous, stick in the mud, says no. And he's like, "Why not? I think it would be great." And she's like, "I don't care to," basically. She's like,
Yeah.
"I just want to play my organ. That's all I do."
Yeah, and he says to her, I think one of the many lines in this movie that seems like it's as if this was a sitcom, and the parent is giving a wisdom to a child where they just really, hammer that lesson into them. He says to her, "You cannot live in isolation from the human race." So it feels like this movie is trying to give you many different morals, and that's one of those instances where the characters are very on the nose with what they say.
Good life lesson for the kids out there. You cannot live in isolation from the human race forever.
Yeah, well, this was actually, a message that they wanted to give out to Japan during the 1800s.
So that's what Herc Harvey was going for. It was a treatise on Japanese isolation theory.
Yes, and then when Admiral Matthew Perry came, suddenly it was like a whole new awakening, which is just like the priest in this movie. He's the representative of that.
Wow, there's a ton of interpretation in this movie I somehow missed.
Yeah, it's very subtle and nuanced.
So anyway, she's playing the organ, and they keep cutting to the stained glass windows, and you see all these, religious imagery. There's a lot of religious stuff going on in this movie as she's playing the organ. It's just you see all these, symbols and stuff, and then the priest says, "Well, it would be good to introduce you to the town. Some of the women in town might not be comfortable." I love that. Oh, there's a sexy young organist in town. She's going to steal all the men. That's the problem in Salt Lake City. But Mary will have none of that. Mary just says, "As long as they say I'm a good organist, I don't care."
Yeah, the other women in the town must have heard that she came from a place that had a sexy calendar in their organ factory, and so she's tainted.
Oh, she's one of those big town girls from Kansas.
Those Topeka folk.
That's right. She moves fast.
Yeah.
So this is Mary's new gig, playing in this huge church, and the priest is very excited to have her, even though she flat out says, "I'm not really religious, I'm just here for the job." And he finds that a little troubling, and this will come back to haunt Mary later, but for now, it's all just a gig to her, and she doesn't care. She's just here for the money.
Yep, she is all work and no play.
Yes.
The only play is play organ, and that's it.
So she works and plays at the same time. She has found a loophole.
Right, but somehow the thing that she's playing is the most miserable thing on this earth.
Okay, so Mary, after church the first day, she's talking to the priest, as you do as you introduce yourself to the new boss. And he's like, oh, would you like to explore the area? You're new in town. How about I take you around? And she's like, hey, how about that creepy old amusement park? Can you take me there? And he's basically, oh, no, child, that place is haunted. And she's like, please, please, please. And so he takes her out to salt air for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Mary is someone who explicitly doesn't like people and she doesn't like religion, yet she jumps at the opportunity to hang out with the priest at the carnival.
Well, to be fair, he's the only guy in town who has not hit on her, so she's 1 for 2 at the moment.
Right. We'll just wait until the creepy man, and I'm not talking about Mr. Linden, starts talking to her. You know, I can only imagine what pickup lines he'll whip out on her.
Well, as long as that's all he's whipping out, that's all we can hope. Okay, so the priest takes Mary out to this old abandoned amusement park, and this is the first time we really see salt air, you know, in its prime form up close. And she's like, can we go in there? Can we walk around? And he's like, oh no, it's illegal and dangerous, and I'm a man of the cloth. I could not do that. She's like, well, I'll just have to come back myself sometime. And he's like, I don't think that's a good idea, but she's determined. She wants to explore this place, and she will come back, but it's later in the movie.
Yep, she'll come back multiple times, in fact. No matter what, no matter, you know, how many times she's told to just not bother with this place, she is determined to get there and explore it.
Okay, so we're almost halfway through the movie already. I swear to God. Okay, so Mary goes back to the house. I'm going to jump through. Some of the stuff with Mr. Linden is kind of gratuitous. It takes too long. We'll just say the short version. This guy hits on her a lot. She says no. He tries to see her in the bath. He tries to peep through her door. She says no. But she gets creeped out because she keeps seeing this corpse man outside her window. One time she sees him at the base of the staircase inside the boarding house. And she's like, somebody's stalking me. And she starts screaming. And so the other people in the house are wondering, what the hell's wrong with this girl?
Yeah, and then one night, you know, I think I mentioned this earlier, she sees him out the window, and then one thing that I thought was interesting was that she sees him and I think screams or whatever, and then it immediately cuts to her alarm clock ringing. And so what that tells me, the way that I interpret that is that was a dream, because you know, just that type of transition from the scary moment into her waking up, and instead of, you know, just lingering on it and seeing what her reaction is from there. That's the way that I interpreted that. I'm not sure if you saw it any different. But, you know, she has that experience that night, and then she wakes up the next morning, and Mr. Linden is greeting her with some coffee that he, you know, wanted to give her just to start the day.
He's just a friendly guy.
He's a friendly guy. And, you know, if this was a Friday the 13th movie, we would probably have a 10 to 15 minute scene of him making that coffee that he then gives her.
Okay, but no, to get back to your point, the interpretation of the dreams. Yeah, the director and the writer of this movie, there were two different guys. I forget who the writer was. They have a lot of big ideas about dreaming and consciousness and heaven and hell and alive and dead and souls and soulless and religion. And again, it's such a short movie and it's kind of cheap that they kind of half go into it some of the times. But I do agree with you that they really play with the idea here of, is she awake or not in some of these scenes?
Yeah, this movie throws out a lot of different questions and then gives you no answers. And it explores a lot of dreaming. It explores a lot of, you know, just plain hallucinations. You know, it explores this idea of having this out-of-body experience where you're not even existing to everyone around you. So it throws everything at the wall, and you know, and you kind of just have to sit on it and make those conclusions yourself.
But again, you can see why it inspired so many directors over the years, because it's open-ended and it's been described as an art film. It's kind of artsy, because it doesn't draw a lot of conclusions. But I can see why these people like David Lynch would like this movie. It's right up his alley.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some would say that this movie was the inception of its time with how it plays with dreams.
Yes. Exactly the same type of movie.
Yes.
Okay, so the next morning, now Mary's world is going to get real weird. So she's had her first day in town. She's being stalked by this corpse. She's got a creepy guy across the hall. She plays organ in a church and has no passion for it. And the next morning, she has breakfast with Mr. Linden. And she drops a lot of quotes here. She's like, you know, in daylight, it's a different world. When I look around and look outside, it's just the normal world. At night, that's when all the dreams and the fantasies begin. And if he, of course, takes that as that she's hitting on him. But no, she's just saying, no, I don't like the night. The night is scary to me. And so that's what she's hinting at, that things are going to get increasingly more weird for her.
Yeah, there's multiple times throughout the movie where she'll throw out this very random quote about the daylight or whatever, and she'll try to say something that seems like it's profound, and then everyone else will just kind of brush it off. And I think that's interesting because Mary says herself that she's a realist, that she is very convinced that the things that are happening to her are real. And then once she starts saying all these out there things is when everyone else has to try and shut her down. So she's kind of a character who's at war with herself, with how she comes into the movie believing certain things, and then how she now has to challenge those beliefs based on what she's experiencing and how other people are reacting to what she's saying.
Yep, and now we are going to get one of the big standout creepy scenes of the movie. This is maybe my favorite scene in the movie, where she's going to spend the entire day shopping. She doesn't have to just start work today. She has the entire day in Salt Lake City to go shopping at the mall. And she goes out to this mall, which is apparently this real store in Utah that still exists today. I forget the name of it. But Brian, here's another example of the great cheap guerrilla filmmaking they did in this movie. The director did not want to pay for a permit to film in the mall, so he just basically walked up to the checkout clerk at the girl at this register, and he's like, "I'll give you $20, just don't notice us filming over here for the next 20 minutes." So it's really them just filming in the middle of a mall during a shopping day, just a regular day. There's no permits or anything. It's just them walking around in a mall.
Is there any explanation as to what the beeping noise is in the background of this scene? Because we hear it a lot.
And I didn't. I have to listen for it. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I don't think it's supposed to mean anything. I think it's supposed to be just a mall sound, but I had no idea what it meant.
Yeah, but there's no greater meaning to the scene. They just didn't have a permit, so they just walked into a mall and started filming. So, yeah, she's in a mall. She's trying on a dress. She's buying a new dress for work. And all of a sudden, and again, this is one of the standout scenes in the movie, her world starts to get all blurry. Everything blurs, and the color of the film, the actual stock, changes colors a little bit to more sepia. Is that how to pronounce it? I think so. But all of a sudden, nobody can hear her or see her. She's like in a different plane from everyone, and she's walking around talking to people in the mall, and nobody knows she's there, and it's the weirdest scene.
Yeah, she tries to talk with the girl who was helping her with her dress. She has no response. Tries talking to the other customers, no response. And then I guess she just decides to leave the store for some reason. If you ask me, she could have used that opportunity while she was invisible or whatever it was to steal some clothes. Mm-hmm. Not condoning that, but that is something that she could have potentially done. But she begins to run around all over the place, all around town, and the only sound that she can hear is the sound of her footsteps. So nobody can hear her, and she can't hear anybody else. The only thing that she can hear is the sound of her own footsteps as she's going around town.
Yeah, and this is the stuff you mentioned earlier where they cut out all the sound in the movie, and it's just like Foley artists just of her heels tapping on the pavement. It's a really effective and eerie scene when you take all the sound out of a shot except for her footsteps. And she's just running around town trying to figure out what's happened to her. She's somehow, negated herself out of existence where she's kind of half in the world, half out, and she doesn't know what's going on. And I just love the way it's filmed. Again, this is just a first-time filmmaker with no money. This is just a scene he came up with.
Now, I have to ask, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, why did they focus on the jackhammer?
Well, because sound. They're just saying that all the sounds are gone to her. And so they focus on things that would be loud. A jackhammer, road construction. I mean, you could look at it as some kind of sex metaphor. I don't know if that was intended, but I believe it was just they wanted something loud that would show to the audience, oh, look, all the sound is gone.
Do you know how much the cost of renting the jackhammer was?
There's no way he paid a cent for that jackhammer. He just walked around until he found a jackhammer.
So they were just walking around Salt Lake City trying to find the loudest thing possible in the hopes that they could shoot it.
The more I read about this movie, yes, that's exactly what they did. Again, take out the music. It's just them walking around Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
So she fades in and out of existence for a while, and finally she hears birds chirping, and all of a sudden she's back in the world, and she goes to a water fountain to get some water to freshen up, and she had quite a little shock. What just happened to me? And as she's there, she looks up and she sees the corpse man who's been following her. She screams, and as fortuitous as it would be, she runs right into the arms of a doctor who says, come to my office. What's wrong with you, dearie?
Yeah, and one thing that I thought was interesting is that she very clearly sees the man based on her reaction, but we as the audience don't.
Yes. They forgot to include the shot.
Yeah. All we see is just a body walking into frame, and we can assume that it's the man, but we never actually see his face. So you said that they forgot to include the shot. I would believe that. I don't know if there's any other meaning beyond that, but I just thought that was something that I wanted to point out.
I noticed that exact same thing. I'm like, we never actually saw the shot of the bad guy. We just see her screaming and running.
Yeah, and then, I mean, admittedly, also, if you are this guy, it is a little creepy just to walk up to someone as they're at the water fountain, you know, and just stand there. He's very much in her personal space.
Yeah, so this doctor sees this woman screaming hysterically because she thinks somebody's following her, even though nobody's there, and he takes her back to the office. And now we delve a little into the psychology. They actually tried to delve into what's wrong with Mary, and they try to introduce a subplot here where basically he says, you don't have a husband? You don't have a boyfriend? She's like, no, I don't like people in my world. And he's like, that's not very healthy. Maybe you're seeing these visions and it's guilt that you don't belong to a church. You don't belong to a community. You have no men. You don't feel love. Maybe you're inventing people out of guilt. And she doesn't buy this at all. And what else? He says, also you were in a car crash recently. Perhaps you have a head injury of some sort.
Yeah, he throws out a lot of different ideas here. I interpret the scene as the movie trying to be like, okay, so this is like around the halfway point of the movie. You've seen a bunch of different things. Let's try and, you know, maybe explain them a little bit. You know, this is just like a little catch up for everyone. But they throw out all these ideas about if she has like survivor's guilt, if, you know, if it's just her imagination, if the man is supposed to represent her father or something like that. So there's all these different ideas that are thrown out there. But Mary is insistent on the fact that she's a realist. She's not imagining anything. You know, so even though there are all these theories being thrown at her, she's consistent with what she believes, that, you know, she's not imagining anything, despite what she had just experienced where she was, you know, not noticed by anybody for an extended period of time.
I love the irony in this scene. I was just thinking about it right now, where she's like, no, I will not accept any fantastic, you know, explanation from behavior. I'm a realist, and I am fixated in reality. And then she's like, you know where the solution must be? At that old, creepy, haunted, abandoned amusement park.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier. She's constantly at war with herself, where she says, oh, I'm a realist, but yet she's still so fixated on this carnival, even though, you know, other than whatever sensation she has, there's no reason to believe that the carnival has anything to do with it.
Yeah, she's just obsessed with that place, and she is diagnosed herself, and doctors love when you do that. Oh, here's my diagnosis. I have to go to the haunted amusement park. There's something there that will explain my problem. And the doctor's like, no. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to go out there. And he's like, someone should go with you. It's not safe. And she's like, no, I think I'm good. I'll go by myself. So here we go. She's going to traipse off to the old creepy solitaire resort. And this is another great scene in this movie. The first time she's there all by herself.
Yeah, she goes there against the orders of everyone else, against the orders of the priest, against the orders of the doctor, who stated that he's not a psychiatrist. So I'm not sure what he is exactly then, considering he was having a very psychiatrist-like conversation.
I'm a dermatologist. I'm here to pop your pimples.
Yeah, he's the best podiatrist in Salt Lake City.
Okay, yeah, so explain this scene. Again, this is like Nirvana to me, people who love abandoned amusement parks, where she actually just wanders around an abandoned solitaire resort by herself as the camera just follows her. And there's like no music or anything other than the organ music. It's really just 10 minutes of pure atmosphere.
Yeah, so this is the first time we actually see the inside of the carnival, but she's walking all around. Her eyes are lifeless. She is pretty much expressionless throughout the entire thing. So it's basically like she's kind of in a trance the whole time. She's walking around, and, you know, there's all these weird things happening to her. She passes by the slide, and then the mattress, whatever it was, goes down the slide by itself. And I watched that scene a couple times just to look and see if we could see like a production assistant pushing it or anything, and we couldn't. So I'll give them credit for that. But like you said, she doesn't say anything. It's just the organ music and the occasional silence, and it's a very, very creepy scene because it makes you think that something's going to happen. At least just with just the way that they're setting up this place. But really, all the creepiness in it just comes from the carnival itself. Nothing actually happens to her. She's just exploring the carnival, but yet we just feel so uncomfortable the entire time, just with the emptiness of it and the music in the background and the silence and her blank space or her blank face. So, it's a very effective scene, and the next time she comes back to the carnival, it's not going to be this empty. So, she should be grateful and of what she has at this point in time.
Yeah, at one point there's an old ballroom where she walks in, and it's still got streamers and stuff from the ceiling from the last time they had a party there. And who knows how long ago that party was, like 30 years old or whatever. But when I watch that, I think of The Shining with the Overlook Hotel, all the ballroom scenes at the end. I'm like, oh wow, so that's something maybe Kubrick kind of took for The Shining. I just love the imagery in this whole scene, even though, like you said, nothing happens. There's one legitimately kind of creepy scene, like you said. She's walking by a slide, and a little mat that you would sit on to go down the slide comes sliding down right by her, and she looks up, she kind of jumps, but like there's no jump scares here. A lesser movie would have all sorts of stuff jumping out at her. There's nothing here. It's just pure dread. That's all you can say. It just feels like you're walking around a place dead people used to be, like a cemetery.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why this scene is also so effective is because it's the first time we see the carnival, and normally we're training ourselves to think that a bunch of crazy things are going to happen, but nothing happens. So that way, when the next time she comes to the carnival and all these insane things happen to her, we're unprepared for it, because what we know and what she knows is this is just an empty carnival where sometimes things will move by themselves. But then, later on, once things really go insane, this whole thing becomes a lot creepier, just because we have this quiet, empty, abandoned place where nothing's going on.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to get into the crazy stuff now. So she has been out here at Saltaire. She's explored it. There's really nothing other than it's just a creepy old resort that no one's been in for 20 years. She goes back to the boarding house. Mr. Linden hits on her. After about the 11th time, she says, yes, fine, I'll go out with you to dinner tonight. And so they have a dinner date. And then she goes to church to practice her organ for the first time. Or just not the first time. I guess she's already been there once. But she just wants to spend some time. And we get a really creepy nightmare sequence here when she's playing this organ in the church for the first time.
Yeah, this is completely horrific. I've made it clear that I do not like the organ, but this is like taking the creepiness to a whole other level, just because, while she's playing the organ, she's all of a sudden something just comes over her, and then she goes from normal to completely off the rails. And the way that her fingers move as she starts playing the keys, it just looks really gross and unnatural, and they show it a lot. And then she sees all these visions of the carnival while she's playing the organ. Kind of like earlier in the movie when she would see visions of the carnival even when she wasn't actually in it. We see these demon people popping out of the water. The water that we could assume is at the carnival. Things start spinning really fast. We see these dancers that start spinning really fast, and then the sequence ends with the man. I guess that's what he's known as, the man. He leaves the dancing crowd and slowly walks up to the camera to appear as if he's going to choke Mary. So it's really in your face as he gets close to the camera with his hands outstretched, and it looks like he's going to choke you as you're watching it. And it's a very, very disturbing scene. Yeah, and
it's a cool scene. You get she's in a trance, her fingers are flying all over the organ. We cut to the stained glass in the church, and we see stuff like "cast out devils" written on the wall. But yeah, she just sees this nightmare vision of the Salta resort, and it's not empty this time. She sees all these dead people dancing around and the corpse man coming for her. And this is, again, one of the standout scenes in this movie. And she screams when he reaches out to grab her. And we immediately cut to the reality, and it's the priest, her new boss, grabbing her hand saying, "Why are you playing that profane, ugly music in my church? Have you no sense of decency?" Like, because she's been playing this, instead of, lovely church music, this creepy horror movie music.
Yeah, I took this down. One of the things he says to her is, "I feel sorry for you and your lack of soul." So, this movie really likes to hammer in the whole thing about souls and how the church is related to souls and how the music is related to souls. And I guess what they're trying to say at this point in time is that she doesn't have a soul. So that's something I guess that we can go into later once we try to interpret things. That's something that I felt like was an important line.
I have definitely seen some interpretations of that as well that, well, I'll spoil it a little for people. One of the arguments is, I'm not sure I agree with this or not, is that because she's not religious, she goes to hell. That's her big sin. She doesn't believe in religion like everybody else. And they commented all throughout the movie, and because she's not religious, she is, taken by the demons down to hell at the end. That's one interpretation, right?
Yeah, well, I think that makes complete sense to me because the priest tells her to, essentially, that she's fired. And so she starts to get up to leave the church. One of the things he says to her is, basically just don't turn your back on the church. We can still save you. And so I guess the implication there is that because she's without religion, that she doesn't have these beliefs, that's what's causing her to, have all these strange behaviors and play this devilish music. And so I think the way that I view that is the movie is taking a pro-religion stance in saying that, she's in this holy place, but because she's not engaged with it in any way, it's causing her to have this like out-of-body demonic experience.
And I probably would not have agreed with you yesterday, but when I watched it today, and again, I saw that stained glass window, and they immediately focus on the phrase, "cast out devils," maybe I kind of do agree with you now.
Yeah, I think, and they make that like they very clear too. Like they focus on that, and I think earlier in the movie, when she's at the church, she's staring at one of the windows, and the little thing that it says on that window is to heal sickness. And so I'm not sure what they're trying to say with that, but I think they're very purposeful with what they're choosing to show, and they chose to show to cast out the demons and I guess to heal the sick in some way. Of all the possible phrases that they could use, those are the ones that they chose to focus on.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll save that for the end here. Okay. So.
Yep.
So she's fired from her job for playing profane music in a church, and she's just kind of stunned. And she goes outside, and she has her date with Mr. Linden, blah, blah, blah. It's not really important to the plot. And they go back to the boarding house, and he tries to make a move on her and come in and kiss her. And she initially says, "Yeah, you can come into my room." And then she says, "No, I changed my mind." And he goes in for the kiss anyway. And she looks up in a mirror when he kisses her, and it turns out that Mr. Linden has been replaced by the corpse guy, the dead guy who's been chasing her the whole movie, and he's the one kissing her. And that's a pretty good little scare moment in the movie. And she screams, and all of a sudden she turns around and kicks Mr. Linden out and explains. She's like, "There's somebody following me, and he was in the church, and he's at the resort, and I've seen him." And Mr. Linden says, "Screw you, you're nuts," and bails on her. "I'm not hooking up with a psycho broad." And she basically, from here on out, it's just one nervous breakdown until the end of the movie.
Yeah, and I think this scene is important just as it shows a little bit of character development for her because, she's made it clear how much she doesn't care about companionship with people. She doesn't have any particular interest in being with people. But yet, when Mr. Linden offers to spend the night with her, she agrees to that. And obviously she doesn't want it in any sort of romantic sense, but she just doesn't want to be left alone. And, I guess that the whole thing in the church is kind of like a tipping point for her where now she's, recognizing like all the reality of the things that she's experiencing. And she thinks that, hey, maybe being around people will give me a little bit of security. And so she's starting to, change her perspective on things based on what she's gone through, and thinking maybe, oh, well, maybe if I do spend time with people, it'll help protect me in some way.
But alas, no such luck for poor Mary Henry. Basically she has no purpose in town anymore. She's been fired from her job. She has to leave town in shame, and the landlady's now mad because Mary's moving furniture around in her room, trying to block doors so this creepy guy, this corpse, can't get in her room, the stalker. And so the landlady kicks her out. And so we're really the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie here where Mary's been kicked out of her job. She's been kicked out of the boarding house. And she just wants to leave town. She's silent. She goes out to her car, packs up her bags, and drives out. But the town will not let her leave.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that happens before she leaves is that the doctor from earlier, Dr. Samuels, he shows up, and apparently we don't see this, but she apparently rejects the doctor's help, even though he's trying to help. And then one of the things that he says in reference to her wanting to leave the city is that I hope she can leave the city. So he's kind of, throwing out the idea of even though she may want to physically leave the city, she mentally might not be able to.
Yeah, he has written her off as a basket case at this point. This lady's nuts.
Yeah, and I think, probably with good reason at this point, just kind of based on some of the things that are happening, yeah.
Okay, so she tries to leave town and her car breaks down. The alternator or something goes out, or transmission, I forget, and she pulls into the gas station. I don't know if it's the same one as before, but he says, okay, get in your car and I'll put her up on the racks and we'll fix the fix the transmission. And as she's up there, this is the grand finale of the movie. From here on out, it's just all hell for poor Mary Henry. She dozes off, and when she wakes up, she looks over, and the creepy stalker corpse guy is standing in the garage looking at her. He has found her, and she screams, falls out of the car, and starts running back into town for help. They're trying to kill me. Someone's trying to kill me, and she goes invisible again, just like before in the mall.
Yeah, and I think this is another instance, and you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't see the man. I think we just see the shadow of
his
the
feet.
man.
Yeah, his feet.
Yeah, his feet. And so this is another instance where she clearly sees the man, but we don't. And this is already established as being a dream sequence because she nods off, and then all of a sudden that's when everything starts going crazy. And so she's going all around town just like she was earlier, but nobody can hear her, and she can't hear anything either. It's just she's saying to herself, how come nobody can hear me? How come I can't hear anything? The only thing that she hears is the sound of her own footsteps. She tries to go to a taxi. The taxi just immediately drives away because they don't notice her. She goes to the bus station and she tries to get a bus ticket, but nobody can hear her too. So, she's just completely just in her own hell right now.
Yeah, again, just nervous breakdown. She's terrified. There's a great visual here. She runs onto a Greyhound bus. The one thing she can hear, I always thought that was interesting, she can't hear any sounds when she's invisible and the world is fading out. But she does hear eastbound bus now boarding gate 9, which I thought was interesting because if you think about that, east from Salt Lake City would be back to Kansas. I believe this is the town telling her, return from where you came, which makes sense at the ending if you think about it.
Yeah, I noticed this too on the second time that I watched it, that she all of a sudden can hear the voice of the announcer, and they make it very clear too. I didn't pick up on the whole eastbound, so therefore it must be Kansas thing. But when she goes on the bus, she sees the bus is full of demon people, and so the way that I saw that is they're luring her to come onto the bus. I think it's been made pretty clear over the course of the movie that the demons want her to join them. And so I saw this as, okay, come on the bus with us, come join us. And so it's them getting into her mind saying, okay, now you can hear us. What we're saying is come to where we are on the bus.
Yeah, although I should clarify, you keep saying demon people. For people who haven't seen this movie, they're not demon, it'd be closer to zombies. That's what they would look like. To put an image in people's heads, it's just these white-faced, corpse-looking people sitting on a bus smiling. They were just dead. They look dead.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of describing it too. I only use the language of demon just because in the description for this movie when I watched it, it used the word demon. So
Really?
yes, it's yeah. I think I'll pull it up on HBO Max on what it says, but the description that they have is a church organist battles demons and delusions after a deadly car accident.
Okay, I'll give you that. But yeah, if for people who have not seen this movie, that's not, if you're picturing demons, that's not how I would describe them.
Right. They look like people, but they look like dead people.
Yeah. Okay, so Mary is just screaming. She can't get out of this town. There's undead people surrounding her, trying to get her. It's just everyone against her. And she runs towards the doctor's office, the only one person who has ever listened to her this entire time. And at some point, she fades back into the real world. The birds start chirping again. She's all of a sudden back in our dimension or whatever. And she goes to the doctor's office. And here we go. The last 5 minutes of the movie is her just explaining her situation to the doctor as his back is turned to her, because as he is wont to do, he takes notes as she's talking. But we're going to get a good scare here, one of the best scares in the movie.
Yeah, so she's talking to him, and I think, and maybe this is just me completely misinterpreting things, it looked like from this shot that her hair was a lot blonder than it was before. I don't know if that's supposed to mean anything, but she's telling the doctor about her problems, and then he swivels around in his chair, and it's not the doctor, it's the creepy man, the zombie man.
Yeah, the corpse.
And he gives her this little smile, and then she gets up and screams and runs right towards the camera.
Well, the reason her hair looks different, I think I mentioned it earlier. When she's fading in and out of existence and nobody can hear her, they actually change the color of the film stock, and they change the color. So maybe that's what you notice, is all of a sudden when she jumps back into the real world, maybe her hair's blonder.
That could be it. Yeah, I mean, I didn't notice. I noticed the transition effect that they use when she's going into the dream state. I didn't notice any change in the color, but that could very well be it.
Okay, and right before we're going to have a big showdown, she's going to go off to the Saltaire Resort to settle all this once and for all. But she has a couple of quotes here she tells to the doctor that I'll probably use one of these as the stinger at the end of the episode. She's like, I don't belong in this world. Something separates me from other people. I don't belong. I don't fit in. And she says, everywhere I turn, they won't let me go. They're blocking my escape. And she talks about the corpse man. She says, he's trying to prevent me from living. He's trying to take me back somewhere, which will become very important in our discussion later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because she is not given any type of information that would give her that indication. So, her saying that is just like all of a sudden she's just, all these things are hitting her, and she's realizing, oh, this might be what's happening. And it kind of, it helps the audience a little bit understand things too. Even though her perception of reality is completely warped, it's probably the most distinct explanation for everything that's been going on so far.
Yeah. Okay, and here we go. The big grand showdown. She drives out to the Saltaire Resort, the abandoned amusement park. Once and for all, she somehow knows that the answer to all her questions is out there. And she is not going to like what she finds out, is she?
No, definitely not. And when she comes back there, she immediately goes back to that lifeless expression that she had earlier. So she's just drawn to this place. And we got a lot of really cool shots. In particular, I like the one where it's all dark and we see her figure in the darkness walk up towards the lit up, dried up lake as it is. I think that's probably my favorite shot of all the ones that they have. Mm-hmm. At one point they zoom in on something at the dried up lake and I wasn't sure what that was. Like it looked like it was posts or something like that. I wasn't sure why they chose to focus on that, but they did.
I was wondering that too, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and am I correct in saying that this is a dried up lake?
This, I believe, is the Great Salt Lake that the resort sits on the side, and it's probably at low tide or it's receded at certain points of the year. So that's probably the point when it's at lower tide, and that used to be covered with water, but it's not right now.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's my guess. Yeah.
Sure.
I know the director mentioned, as an interview I read somewhere, he said he shot an entire roll of film that they overexposed and they couldn't use it in the movie. And it was supposed to be all these corpses rising out of the water and walking across the sand into the Saltaire Resort to do their little dance. But they couldn't use it because they ruined the film. but I think when they're zooming on the posts, I think that's probably would have been some kind of indicator of where they were walking or something. I'm not sure exactly what that was.
Okay, yeah, I mean, from what we do see some shots of the corpses coming out of the water, but
Yeah,
I
it doesn't
think
go anywhere.
yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. The next time we see them is they're in place getting ready to dance. So we don't, it's like all of a sudden, they're there.
Yeah. Okay, I'll sum this up so we can start interpreting this movie. She goes into the dance hall and she sees all these corpses dancing. And in reality, the director just went to some Mormon dance academy and paid a bunch of extras, some dance students. Here, I'll give you $10. Just dance for me for about an hour on film. And they're all dressed up like dead people dancing this slow ballroom dance. It's very creepy. She just sees all these corpses dancing. And then she sees the corpse man, the main leader guy who's been stalking her the whole movie, and they're dancing, except he's dancing with a dead version of her. She's like pale and lifeless, and Mary sees him dancing with a dead version of her, and she screams. It's so horrific, and she just bails and runs out onto the beach.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the trigger for these corpses, because when she screams, they just start chasing after her. And, so far in the movie, they haven't really been acknowledging her that much. They're kind of just doing their thing. They're dancing by themselves. But when she screams, they don't waste any time, and they just take off right after her. And I know, I'm sure you are probably aware of this, of like the scene of all the zombie characters chasing after the main character. Obviously, what that ends up inspiring, right?
Benny Hill.
Well, I was going to say that this was actually the inspiration for the opening scene of A Hard Day's Night.
I was wondering where you were going with that. Yeah. So would she be Paul or John?
I would say that in this instance, the character of the corpse man would be played by Paul's grandfather, as he's a very important character in that movie.
And he's very clean, if I recall.
Yeah. Very, very clean character, but a little very dirty in his personality.
Well, this was only 2 years before A Hard Day's Night, I believe, so it very well could be the scene that inspired the Beatlemania.
I don't know a Carnival of Souls, but I do know a Piccadilly Circus. When is the Carnival of Souls coming to Liverpool?
This is why I bring Brian back, you guys. He can make me laugh with random Beatle jokes.
Well, my favorite part of the movie is when the credits roll and Obla Di Obla Da starts playing.
So, was Mary the Walrus? Is that the key to this movie?
Yes, and then the carnival actually takes place in an octopus's garden.
All right, so she is chased out by hundreds of zombies, and including the main guy, who I believe is called Mr. Kite at this point, if we're keeping up our Beatle jokes. But yeah, all the undead people chase her out to the beach, and it's just this creepy scene of all these, undead people surrounding her and swarming around her, and she's screaming, and she does a great job. Again, she's a good actress, Candice Hilligoss, and it ends with her collapsing on the beach and all these undead people surrounding her and falling on top of her, and it's really just horrific. And then we go to the surprise twist ending.
Yes, and so Mary's story ends with all the corpse creatures coming up in her face, and then when we come back, we have I guess a couple of police investigators along with the priest and the doctor, and they're describing that they see her footprints and her car is still there, but all they see is a handprint and she's not there at all. And then what we see from there is it goes back to the original river from the first scene of the movie with the drag race, and they pull the car out of the water, and what do we see? We see the corpses of Mary's friends. One of them blinks at one point, I noticed that, and we also see the corpse of Mary herself.
So she was dead all along.
Yep. An inspiration for the Sixth Sense.
Yeah. And that's the movie. It just ends right there. Mary was dead all along, and they offer no explanation, no interpretation. And this is the fun part where Brian and I get to talk about what the hell this movie means.
Yeah, and the great thing is I'm sure we won't come to any sort of conclusion whatsoever because there's no right answers.
Okay, I will let you start. So sum it up for people. This girl gets in a car crash, she dies, and everything that happens after that may or may not just be a dream in her head. We're not sure, but that's the implication. She crashes. At the end of the movie, we see she was dead, so everything in the middle just didn't really happen. And here we go, Mr. TV film student. What would your interpretation be?
Well, you said that some people could say that this entire thing was a dream in her head,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing that I say to counter that is the fact that the corpse characters are, like she said, they're always trying to beckon her back. And so what that tells me is that if this was a dream, that wouldn't be the case, because she would already be dead and this would all be nonsense. But because she's being constantly beckoned back by these corpses, that obviously has got to mean that for some reason or the other, she's still clinging on to life at some point. And, there are multiple times throughout the movie where she is fading in and out of reality. We get this distinct transition effect when she's in the dressing room, and then later on when she's, in the car. And I don't know, my confusion lies in the fact that it seems like we have dreams that are distinctly dreams. Like I said earlier, there's a part where she looks out the window, she sees visions of the carnival, and then it cuts to her alarm clock. So that is obviously a dream. That's the way that I see it. But then, separate from that, when she has her whole moments of phasing in and out of reality, she is also, earlier in the movie, she nods off and is doing things, and then she fades out of reality. So it's kind of like she's experiencing this weird in and out of reality thing while she's simultaneously inside of a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like separate layers of her, I guess, experiences and insanity. And so in terms of coming to a final conclusion about what's going on, I really just have a page of different anecdotes that say to me different things, but I'm not able to come to a specific conclusion. And I'm hoping that, we can talk through this a little bit more so I can understand the way that you're coming from, and maybe it can help me come to a conclusion a little bit better. But what I see is a lot of different anecdotes, and not a lot of them have correlations to each other. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, the first thing I have to say is you have to remember this was a first-time director, first-time screenwriter. They didn't really do this. So I think they're throwing a lot of ideas at you all at once, and they don't necessarily all land. So I don't necessarily know if that's intentional or that's just they didn't really know what the story was. They're just giving as much as they can all at once. That's one interpretation. But then again, I've read, just simplifications of the story. I was reading one summary. Someone, sum up Carnival of Souls in 30 words, and they say oh, a lady gets in a car crash, but because she's an atheist or not religious, she doesn't go to heaven. Her soul lingers in between the worlds. She doesn't know if she's alive or dead. And so death has to come bring her back because she doesn't know where she is. She's like in Poltergeist, the ghosts don't know where they are. They don't know they're dead. And so she's caught in this weird world in the middle, and that's the corpse guy all along, is just death, just trying to beckon her down to the world of the dead where she belongs. She doesn't know that yet. She fights it. So, I mean, it's somewhere in the middle. I don't really get too much into the dream aspect. I think the dream stuff, a lot of it's a red herring. I don't really know if it's any more complicated than she's dead and just doesn't know it yet, and death has to help her.
But then what's the significance of the carnival in this case?
That's the thing. It's the gateway. It's the gateway, but I mean, it's supposed to be the gateway. I don't think that they do a good enough job in the movie explaining that. I think the carnival is a cool location the director found that they wrote a movie around, and that's about it. I don't think there's much bigger picture than that.
Okay, yeah, because I think another thing that I'm caught on is the fact that, there are all these strange things happening in the carnival, but then there's also all the corpse characters are just dancing around as if this was a regular thing that they do, mm-hmm. And then it's not until she screams is when all of a sudden they start coming after her.
Yeah, I mean, again, you could go down so many different rabbit holes with how you want to interpret this. I think there's less there than you think there is. That's my impression. And I've seen it a lot more than you, and not saying that I know more than you, just your interpretation or view of this movie may change the more you watch it, because mine has changed over the years the more I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be the type of thing where you are so desperately trying to find answers that you end up creating a lot more questions than you need to, when a lot of time the answer is just there is none. Like one thing that I put in my notes was that at the end of the movie, the characters that are present for, talking about how Mary is suddenly missing are the priest and the doctor. And both of these characters throughout the course of the movie are seen as like, I don't know, like they let out a bunch of wisdom. They're the ones that are giving out all these lessons about your soul and about imagination, whereas she's always talking about reality, reality, reality. And so I think where typically people would find that, the priest and the doctor might not have a lot of similarities with each other. In this sense, they're kind of like the grounded parts of the movie that are, connecting her to these outer experiences that she's having and are helping her to interpret them in some way. So I don't know what the significance of them is necessarily, but I do think that religion definitely plays a part in it, just in the fact that the most surreal experience she has over the course of the movie is in the church when she's, just doing her thing and playing the organ, and then all of a sudden things go crazy. That doesn't happen anywhere else. And I think that that's something that's got to be said about that.
Yeah, and the movie tries so hard to beat this religion subplot across. As you pointed out, they keep going back to it, and they mention it, and it just keeps coming back. So the director obviously intended that to be part of the story. Now, whether you think it landed or not, that's a whole different question. I would argue this is not a great movie. Like, if you had a budget and maybe people that had made more movies like this before, I think you could really land this as a great movie. But I do think it's really effective despite its flaws and cheapness, that it somehow works. And I'm always kind of shocked it works, because the guy is so good at just imagery and sound and just, progressing a story. I don't necessarily think the themes all work. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this movie is trying to say a lot of things, but doesn't really end up saying much, just because it's so inconclusive with everything, and because there's so many ideas that are thrown at the wall. And so what the moral is of this story, I don't know. But I definitely agree with you in the sense that its effectiveness doesn't come with, I guess, the story itself, but more of how it tells the story, and how it chooses to pace itself, how it chooses to show certain things but not show other things, how it chooses to just give us all these sounds that are really make us feel a part of this really dark and dreary experience.
Yeah, and again, this movie gets described often as a dream, a nightmare, just an art film. My wife, when we were watching it today, she's like, nothing happens in this movie. And I'm like, I know, but it still works. And that's always been my argument with Halloween, too. Nothing happens in Halloween either. It's really just, a couple things happen at the end of the night, but it's all atmosphere. And I am a sucker for atmosphere movies, for mood movies, for music, where the music just, describes the entire movie. The music just defines everything. But yeah, this movie is just like Halloween in that sense, where there's not a whole lot that goes on. It's just mood. And I think it really that's why I always recommend it to people. Like, the themes, I don't know what's really there. I mean, I've seen lots of discussion about it over the years. I've never seen anything that swayed me one way or another. But man, the mood and the eeriness I will always come back to. And that damn salt air resort.
Yeah, the resort is a very interesting location. What's the name of that place that you had mentioned earlier that was like this place?
Well, there's one at Waterslide Park. I think it's called Rockahula. It's on the way to Las Vegas.
Okay, yeah. So I am going to look into that place myself, just because it's a shame that the Salt Air Resort is no longer, with us. Not much like Mary. Because it is a pretty cool location, and it's cool with what it is by itself, but it's also cool with how they choose to show it to us.
Yeah, and to be fair, Saltair Resort is still there. It just looks different now. They've rebuilt it since I think in the 80s or 90s. So it is still there, but nothing like this movie. And with that, I believe we've done it. You have successfully watched a movie for the first time, come on and intelligently described it, and accurately. I was gonna say accurately recommended, but I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. Do you recommend this movie to horror fans who have not seen it before?
Yes, I would definitely recommend this movie to people. But that being said, if you're my friend and I'm going to recommend that you watch this, I'm just going to make sure that I'm not around when you watch it.
Yes, please leave Brian out of it. He has suffered enough. It's again, this is one I've had good success with over the years. It's old, it's dated, it moves slow, nothing happens, it's only an hour long, yet for some reason it works, and I don't know why, but I will continue to recommend it to people, and I'm very glad we had a chance to talk about it on Horror Month this year.
Sure, yeah, and this was surely a horrifying discussion for a horror movie.
Yes, with some Beatles jokes thrown in.
Sure, yeah, well, this is going to get cut out. But, it's just like Survivor historians where, you always like to have a little bit of Beatles when you're first starting out.
Yeah, there's no way that joke makes it. No one will get that.
No, I know.
Okay, so anyway, I want to thank you for stopping by. And now that you have subjected yourself to my experiment, I am willing to discuss if you would like to come back for a third time and you introduce me to a movie, perhaps.
Great. Well, I think a movie that you would really enjoy would be Scream 2.
Damn you, Farrell.
I don't know if you want to go into this, but can we just rehash this a little? Because I was listening to the 100th episode, and I was told that I was a little combative the first time around.
Well, other people have told me that. I don't remember you being combative. I thought it was fun because you actually would challenge me on some ideas. I wouldn't call it combative, but I've heard other people say, "Oh, that's the episode where he argued with you." Because no one does that usually.
Well, if you want, and I didn't listen to our episode, but I do think I come into this a little bit more prepared this time. So if you want to go for like a round two, just like very briefly with it, I'm willing to entertain that.
Well, we're running real short on time as I look at my watch here, Brian. The connection getting real bad here.
Well, I'll just say this. This is my knockout punch that I'm going to throw at you. How would you feel if someone said to you, "Oh, I hate Not Another Teen Movie because that just takes all these movies that I loved growing up and just completely dunks on them and makes a mockery of them?" Because that's kind of like what you were saying with Scream, and I don't see it that way. But I'm curious to know, how you would feel if someone said that to you about a movie that I know you enjoy.
Let's see. I was not prepared for this. Now you're being combative, you dick. No, I see your argument. That's a good point. I just happen to take horror movies very seriously, like good ones that take themselves seriously, like this movie. So I always bristle anytime horror gets turned into a comedy. I do not like when horror crosses over into a comedy because I think it's a cop-out. So it's not so much that they're making fun of horror. I was more concerned that they're ruining horror.
Well, because I think also part of the thesis of Scream is also, I think it's kind of on your side in the sense of, I know you are notoriously anti-sequel, anti-making franchises out of things, and Scream is on the same side of you. Like, it's poking fun at these movies because they've evolved to this point. I think if Halloween was just one movie, I don't think Scream would have much of a leg to stand on. But because Halloween has all these different sequels and Friday the 13th gets completely outrageous, it's able to poke fun at those things and point out the different tropes in these things because things have progressed to that point. And it's agreeing with you with what it has to say about sequels. And then in the later Scream movies, they make fun of the idea of, all the things that happened in trilogies and then all these reboots and stuff like that. And so it's on your side. So I think, you're looking at things a certain way, but if you give it another look, I think you might find that you and Scream have a lot in common.
You know what I hate is that you're right. I can't rebut that.
And, you know, another great thing is that Scream really helped to propel the career of Jamie Kennedy. And so without this movie, we wouldn't have Son of the Mask.
Okay, here's why. Okay. Well, I will say, when I first saw Scream, I kind of liked it. Like, that was kind of fun, but that was always my thing. Oh, this is really going to ruin horror movies. That was my gripe with it. I just didn't like where it was going to go. So, but I will respectfully agree that you probably are correct on all those things. It is on my side, and if I hate Scream, I really have to hate not another teen movie. But I will say I don't especially love 80s and 90s teen movies, so it's not quite the same analogy, but you're close.
Okay. Well, you know, as long as I'm like halfway there, I'm willing to take this one as a win.
Yes, you're living on a prayer. You're halfway there. We're going straight Bon Jovi here. But well, okay, one other gripe I had with Scream. We're running along here. I don't know if I'll cut this, but I remember when Scream debuted, and it turns out, a spoiler, that it's two killers. It's two teen boys killing everyone at the end. And I remember coming out of that theater with my true crime background. That's what I do, is I know true crime studies. So I'm like, no, two teenage boys would never work together for a massacre at their high school. It'd be one. There's no way two teen boys. So I know. And then Columbine happened. And just a couple of years later, it proved me immensely wrong. So I do remember that was one of my gripes with Scream at the time that was quickly disproven.
Yeah, and I think actually Columbine happening ended up affecting the rest of the Scream movies because I'm serious. They had to, you know, use that as like, you know, being a little bit more sensitive in terms of the violence that they showed, because the later Scream movies kind of go into the whole idea of the media creating, you know, these killers. The second Scream movie, and there's two killers in Scream 2. I hate to break it to you, but one of the killers says that he's doing it because he wants to become famous and blame it all on movies and horror movies in particular. He wants to say that, you know, they're the reason why he was doing these things. And so, you know, it's I think that a lot of the points that you have are very much interwoven into the stories of Scream and later on.
Well, so this is now twisted. So if Columbine ruined Scream, does that make me pro Columbine?
Well, it depends. What is your opinion on Doom?
I don't like Doom, but I do like Marilyn Manson, so now I'm conflicted. We should stop. We're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, you've given me a lot to think about. This again, I love when Brian comes on, because Brian comes prepared and he has ideas and he likes bringing things up that are worth discussing. And this is something I mentioned on my 100th episode. All I ask from my co-host is have something to say. And Brian, you always have something to say, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for saying that. You know, I do have a lot to say, and most of the time it doesn't make a lot of sense. But, you know, I'm going to say it with some real conviction.
That's right. You're the Deputy Rick of Staff Picks co-hosts.
You bang.
All right. So anything else you want to add before we sign off here?
No, I you know, just want to thank you for introducing me to the movie. Thanks for having me on again. If you want to do this again, you know, I'd love to be on anytime you need me.
Okay. I will more than likely have you back, but it'll probably be a movie of your choice, just as a thanks for doing this one by my request this time. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'll find something good for you.
Okay, and as always, thank you for listening. Again, this is Horror Month. I hope you guys will seek this movie out, Carnival of Souls, the one from 1962. Do not, under any circumstance, find the remake that they did in the 80s or 90s. It is not worth it. The 60s black and white one is the one you want. And again, we'll be back with more horror movies. Once again, my name is Mario Lanza. This is Staff Picks. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at staffpickspodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter @MarioJLanza. Until next time, I'll be out there searching for more movies that deserve more love, and I'll try to find somebody interesting to come on and talk about them. I'll talk to you guys later. Make sure you know if you're dead. Bye.
I don't belong in the world. That's what it is. Something separates me from other people.